Elias Darrow, a pilot for the Zion Space Force, was no stranger to the feeling of loneliness that came with navigating the vast expanse of space. Over his 12 years of service, he had faced countless arduous missions, from surveying distant planets to rescuing broken-down research stations on the moon's surface. But never before had he encountered a situation as strange as this. This time, his mission was to rescue a moon research station that had lost contact weeks ago. When Elias and his crew approached the station, everything was eerily silent, with no signs of life. The station had suffered severe damage, and there was no trace of the scientists who had once worked there. However, an inexplicable presence seemed to linger in the air. As they inspected the station and gathered information, strange signals began appearing on the ship's radar. The moment Elias' ship entered the station's surrounding space, a blinding light suddenly tore through the stillness of space, causing all the ship's systems to flicker. Elias quickly realized that he and his crew were not the only ones present. Alien creatures, resembling octopuses but with a shimmering silver hue, began to emerge from the distance, gliding through space as if they were part of the cosmic environment. Before he could react, one of them lunged at the ship, piercing the hull as though it were made of paper. From that moment on, chaos ensued. Elias felt a strange dizziness take hold of him, his body enveloped in a thick fog. These creatures did not attack or destroy, instead, they simply pulled him out of the ship without a word. Somehow, Elias was unable to resist, his body seemed hypnotized, drifting into an ambiguous, unfathomable state. Every attempt to send a distress signal or call out to his crew was in vain, as the space around him became unnervingly quiet. After a while, Elias regained consciousness. He realized he was no longer aboard the ship, but had been transported to an entirely different space. It was a long, dimly lit corridor, devoid of any signs of life except for the strange creatures around him. Though they resembled octopuses, these beings exuded a cold, dangerous aura that made him hesitate to move or draw attention. Elias was dragged down the corridor in silence, with no communication or signals from the aliens. They showed no emotions, no gestures, or actions beyond their constant movement, creating a deathly quiet and mysterious atmosphere. Though completely bewildered, Elias understood that he had been abducted, and this violated the terms of the 2215 Cosmic Treaty signed by the Galactic Union, which strictly prohibited interference with other civilizations' lives, especially the abduction or invasion of alien beings with no connection to humanity. However, what baffled him even more was the calmness of these aliens. They did not speak a word, but their movements gave the impression that they knew exactly what they were doing. Elias began to sense an unexplainable feeling, a silence filled with power. It seemed as though they did not regard him as an important being, but merely a tool in a process they were carrying out. When he was dragged through a massive door into an entirely different space, Elias felt a sharp chill. He found himself in a vast area filled with towering black metal structures, resembling an odd amalgamation of coral shapes but made of an incredibly hard metallic material. The towering walls surrounded him, and each step he took echoed with a dry, hollow sound, as though everything was constructed from unyielding, lifeless materials. Elias noticed there was no one else around except the aliens. One of them turned suddenly, casting a cold, authoritative glance in his direction, and Elias felt an overwhelming sense of dominance emanating from them. He could not explain why, but he knew that he was in a place that did not welcome him. Only coldness and indifference awaited. After a time, Elias was led to a detention area. There were no iron bars or physical restraints, only an open space with invisible energy barriers, as if they were part of the environment itself, unseen but palpable. The sensation made Elias feel as though he was trapped in a nightmare with no way out. Every movement was monitored, yet no words came from the alien beings. He could do nothing but follow them until he was confined in a large cell. Inside the cell, Elias discovered 3 strange dragons imprisoned within. One had a transparent body like glass, reflecting the light of distant stars. Another had a mercury-colored body, moving as if it were melting. The third had a powerful build, with solid metallic scales, resembling a great warrior. Though unfriendly, the 3 dragons seemed to be concerned by Elias' presence. It was clear they were unfamiliar with humans, and his arrival in the cell had sparked suspicion. But after a long period of solitude and exhaustion, they began to cooperate, finding ways to deal with their situation. Despite their superior strength, they couldn't escape the cell without each other's help. Elias realized that he and the 3 dragons might be able to cooperate to find a way out. Though he did not know who they were or why they had been imprisoned, he understood that once they had something in common, they could figure out a way to overcome this challenge. The feeling of being imprisoned not only taught him the strength of these creatures but also made him understand that this battle wasn't just a human struggle, it was a survival war between civilizations and the latent power of the universe. Elias Darrow opened his eyes, feeling a sharp pain spread from his head throughout his body. He couldn't remember how long he had been unconscious, but the cold and eerie silence that enveloped everything around him made him realize he was no longer in a familiar place. For the first few seconds, his mind was filled with fragmented memories of the sudden attack by the alien creatures, and the strange dizziness that had pulled him into a hazy state. But now, everything was different. He looked around. The room, if it could even be called a room, seemed endless. The walls were smooth, glossy black, reflecting the cold light of distant stars, but there was no sign of life, only these strange streaks of light. Elias' breath became quicker, and he realized he couldn't control his body as he once had. Every movement felt restricted by an invisible energy, as if the air around him could choke him at any moment. Looking closer, he realized that this structure wasn't a typical prison. The walls weren't made from familiar materials like metal or concrete, but rather a completely alien metal. This metal seemed unbreakable, unlike anything Elias had encountered during his years with the Zion Space Force. It had a perfect shine, a mirror-like reflection, but there were no signs of wear or decay. This was a fortress built from the materials of a civilization far beyond human capabilities. Elias tried to stand, but even the smallest movement made him feel the strange weight on his body. The gravity felt different, not like the gravity he was used to. Every step felt like it was being held back by some invisible force. Slowly, he raised his hand, feeling the smoothness of the metal wall beneath his fingers, but there was no sign of a door or window that could open. This was a completely enclosed space. Just a few minutes had passed, but Elias began to notice that he wasn't alone in this space. Small, regular noises echoed from the dark corners of the vast room. An unseen presence, but clearly perceptible. He turned his head, searching for signs of the alien creatures that had abducted him. But there was no one in sight. The absolute silence continued, with only the faint, strange noises of the metal structure shifting. Strangely, though he couldn't see anyone, Elias felt like he was being watched. He couldn't explain it, but the sensation was unmistakable. Suddenly, a powerful beam of light shone down from above, casting an odd shadow at his feet. Elias looked up, and at the top of the room, a circular door, made from the same metal as the walls, opened. The alien creatures, those octopus-like beings he had encountered earlier, appeared, silently stepping inside. There was no obvious threat, but the sense of power radiating from them made it feel as though they could control everything around them. One of them approached, using its long, soft yet strong tentacles to lift Elias to his feet. No words were spoken, just an indifferent pull, as if he were merely a part of a plan they had long prepared. These tentacles weren't malicious, but they seemed to make him feel small and powerless. Every movement reminded him that this wasn't a confrontation with hostile creatures, but rather an encounter between civilizations, each with incomprehensible power and purpose. Elias was dragged out of the dark room, walking along the cold metal corridors. With every step, it felt heavier, as if an invisible weight was pressing down on him. The strange lights from the walls reflected every movement, but no sound came, as if this spaceship was designed to erase all life and communication. They led him to another area, a larger space where even more bizarre forms of alien creatures appeared. These creatures, though different in shape, all shared one thing in common: an undeniable, powerful presence. Some were transparent, others took on odd, mobile geometric forms. All of them stared at him with cold, indifferent eyes. Elias didn't understand who they were, why he was brought here, or why he was imprisoned in such a strange place. From the moment he entered this space, Elias began to realize how alone he truly was. There was no one to talk to, no explanation for what was happening. All he could do was silently observe and wait. But he knew he couldn't sit in silence forever. The desire to resist, to break free from this control, grew stronger within him. He tried to search for any clues on how to escape this prison, but there was nothing but cold metal walls and silent alien creatures. The differing gravity made movement difficult, and the overwhelming silence made him feel like he was exiled in an endless space, where all resistance seemed meaningless. But in the very moment of his deepest despair, Elias realized something important: not all the creatures here were indifferent to his existence. Among the strange beings, some were looking at him differently. A few had sharp, analytical gazes, as though they were studying him, as if they were considering something. Could they be testing him? Or was there a deeper purpose that Elias hadn't yet realized? No matter how dire the situation, Elias still felt a flicker of hope. Not all of these creatures were enemies. He knew that as long as he could find a way to communicate, find common ground, he could open up the possibility to fight back. Just like in the space battles he had once fought, with a little strategy and perseverance, everything could change. Elias woke up in a vast space, where there was no life except for the strange creatures he had encountered before. After being imprisoned in a bizarre space prison, where there seemed to be no end, he slowly began to realize that nothing here was random. He wasn't the only being held captive in this space. As the light from distant stars shone down, reflecting off the shiny metal walls, Elias saw that he was no longer alone. He felt the presence of other creatures, and suddenly, 3 enormous figures appeared before him. They were not the alien creatures he had seen before, but 3 strange dragons. One had a transparent body, shimmering like glass, reflecting the light like a precious gem. The second was mercury-colored, with shiny scales like silver, moving smoothly and powerfully. The third was the strongest of them all, with a muscular build and tough scales, resembling a powerful warrior, seemingly invincible. At first, Elias didn't know what to do. These creatures showed no signs of friendliness, and a sense of fear overwhelmed him. He stood still, not daring to move, as the 3 dragons looked at him with cold, sharp gazes. No words were spoken. The 3 creatures simply observed, probing him, and Elias could feel the tension in the silent space. But after a long period of silence, everything began to change. The dragons didn't approach him as they had before. Instead, they stood still, observing each other before turning their gaze back to Elias. Strangely, though they didn't communicate verbally, Elias sensed a shift in the atmosphere. A silent understanding began to form between him and these creatures. Despite their wild and fierce appearances, they had no intention of attacking him. With memories of past space battles, Elias quickly realized that his only chance of survival in this situation was to cooperate. Though he didn't understand why the three dragons were imprisoned here, he knew he couldn't escape alone. They needed each other, not just to survive, but also to find a way to defeat the alien creatures that had locked them in this strange prison. In the days that followed, Elias began to observe the dragons more closely. The glass-like dragons seemed to possess the ability to camouflage or change shape, reflecting light in a magical way. The Mercury-colored dragon had the power to manipulate matter, softening or hardening anything it touched. And the warrior dragon, with its tough scales and incredible strength, could break through any barrier that stood in its way. These abilities were the key to Elias formulating a bold plan. With human strategic intelligence and creativity, he realized they could use the unique traits of each dragon to exploit weaknesses in the prison's security system. The security system wasn't the solid walls he had imagined, but rather a complex arrangement of energy gates and invisible force fields. The pure strength of the warrior dragon wouldn't be able to break through them, but the shape-shifting ability of the glass dragon and the matter-altering power of the Mercury Dragon could create an unexpected strategy. Elias began planning in detail. First, the glass dragon would cloak itself and infiltrate the energy-protected areas to scout their structure. The Mercury Dragon would find ways to manipulate the materials that made up these systems, altering their physical properties to weaken them or render them ineffective. Meanwhile, the warrior dragon would use its power to destroy any obstacles in their path. Although the dragons might not fully understand what he was doing, Elias could sense their agreement in their eyes. They were ready. With each passing day, they focused on honing their skills, and a bond slowly began to form between them. Elias taught the dragons strategy and how to use their abilities more subtly, while he also learned from them. Cooperation wasn't just about strategy, it was about connecting civilizations, about the strength of each creature, no matter how different. Together, they began experimenting with new approaches, discovering ways to break the strange security system of the prison. Elias realized that the alien creatures holding them captive didn't just want to keep them in the dark, they were testing them. Perhaps they were waiting for this cooperation, to see how the aliens would respond to strategies and intelligence so different from their own. One moonless evening, when everything was quiet, Elias looked at the three dragons and felt a change within himself. He was no longer a lone pilot, a solitary warrior. He had become part of a powerful team, ready to face the enormous challenges ahead. This feeling, this strange harmony between humans and these creatures, was his only hope to overcome everything and find a way out of this metal hell. With determination, Elias knew that his strategy wasn't just a plan to escape the prison, it was a fight to assert the right to life and freedom for these creatures, as well as for himself. Everything lay ahead, and the battle had only just begun. Elias sat in a dark corner of the prison, his eyes quickly scanning the scattered blueprints and notes on the floor, his mind seemingly working at full capacity. Over the past few days, he had spent every moment analyzing the prison's security system, a set of devices that he quickly realized were not just ordinary security technologies. They were much more complex. But after a long period of study, he had discovered a weakness: the mechanical elements in the Zixitarian defense technology. The Zixitarians, beings shaped like moving geometric shapes with a glossy outer shell and the ability to control powerful energy, always gave the impression of being an invincible army. However, Elias was not one to give up easily. He had noticed that, despite their control over sophisticated machines and energy, the prison's defense system still contained mechanical components that were vulnerable. These included mechanical locks, moving gears, and connection mechanisms that could be broken if exploited correctly. Through his observations, Elias also identified another overlooked weakness: the prison's energy locks, though powerful, could be weakened by targeting their mechanical components. Using the shape-shifting and matter-manipulating abilities of the three dragons, Elias developed a daring strategy. His plan was to leverage the unique abilities of the three dragons. The glass dragon could slip through protective structures by turning invisible and reflecting light to avoid detection. The Mercury Dragon, with its power to manipulate matter, would target the mechanical components, weakening them from the inside. The Warrior Dragon would take on the role of protection, using its strength and tough scales to resist any counteraction from the Zixitarian guards. Elias understood that this was not just a simple escape, it was a battle against time and precision. Every step, every action, had to be executed perfectly to avoid drawing attention. A small mistake could lead to the failure of the plan, and the consequences would be the safety of them all. The three dragons, the strange creatures he had befriended over the past days, were now his indispensable allies. Each brought special abilities that Elias needed to break through the security barriers. But it wasn't just about them. Elias also needed his own creativity and strategic intellect to bring all the elements together into a flawless plan. First, Elias needed to gather detailed information about the Zixitarian patrol schedule. They were not easy creatures to predict, but he had carefully observed their habits during his time in captivity. The Zixitarian guard team was an elite force, possessing superior intelligence and shrewd combat abilities. However, they also had one flaw that Elias had quickly identified: their complacency. With absolute power in their hands, they rarely felt the need to be vigilant, and that was an opportunity Elias knew he had to seize. Thanks to his meticulous nature and outstanding analytical skills, Elias pinpointed the moment when the security system would be at its weakest, when the entire guard team would be focused on checking other areas of the prison. This would be the moment the glass dragon would carry out its critical mission: slip through the energy shields and infiltrate the central control area. The Mercury Dragon would follow closely behind, manipulating the mechanical parts of the security system, weakening the locks and mechanisms of the prison doors. Everything had to be done quickly and accurately. Meanwhile, the Warrior Dragon would take on the role of defense in case of any unexpected discoveries. Its strength was critical, especially when facing a powerful force like the Zixitarian. The day they had decided to execute the plan was approaching. Elias felt with certainty that everything would change, and there would be no turning back. His resilience had been tested throughout his time in captivity, and now, he knew that escaping wasn't just about personal survival. He and the dragons had become a team, not just to flee, but to fight back against the oppression of a civilization trying to impose its power on every being in the universe. As night fell, the space was silent and empty, a sense of tension enveloping the air. The glass dragon vanished into the darkness, its body shimmering like a brilliant shooting star. Elias and the Warrior Dragon moved along a carefully mapped route, heading toward the prison's central control area. To achieve their goal, they would have to face unforeseen challenges. Every step they took was an act of boundless courage. A tiny mistake could lead to catastrophic failure. Meanwhile, the prison doors, though seemingly solid, contained weaknesses that Elias had exploited. The race against time became more intense than ever. As they neared the final door, where the energy shield and mechanical locks combined, Elias felt the highest tension. Everything could fall apart in an instant. But he knew this was the only chance, and he had to take it. The Mercury Dragon had completed its task, weakening the locks and doors, while the Warrior Dragon guarded from behind. Sounds from a distance signaled that panic was beginning to spread throughout the prison, but Elias and his team were ready for the final showdown. They had only one way out, one that they had to fight for until the very last moment. This chapter was not just a breakthrough in Elias's plan, but also a significant milestone in the battle against the oppression of alien civilizations. This struggle was not just about the right to life, but also a fight to assert the freedom of all beings in the universe. The uprising began in silence, like a wave slowly stretching out from the shore, invisible until it swept through and carried everything in its path. With each passing minute, Elias felt that the plan was nearing its critical point. He and his team were prepared, with meticulous steps and careful calculations. This was not just an escape, it was an uprising against the brutal oppression of the Zixitarian race. Together with the three strange dragons, the Glass Dragon, the Mercury Dragon, and the Warrior Dragon, Elias had persuaded the prisoners in the facility to join the rebellion. The creatures held captive here were not only stripped of their freedom but were also treated as mere experimental tools by the Zixitarians. There were many different beings, from monsters living beneath the ice on distant planets to intelligent creatures from civilizations that had long since fallen. All of them had been brought here, where freedom and hope seemed almost non-existent. Everything began when Elias and his dragon team breached the prison's security system. They created a gap in the energy shield, a small crack that gradually spread like a wound, causing the entire prison's structure to begin unraveling. This not only disrupted the ranks of the Zixitarian guards but also created an opportunity for prisoners locked away in the distant, isolated sections of the prison to rise up. Elias's plan was not just to fight against the powerful alien creatures, but also to mobilize every prisoner who could fight. He knew that only by uniting all the prisoners would they stand a chance against the mighty Zixitarian forces. So, when the locks were broken and the energy barriers began to weaken, cries for freedom echoed through every corner of the prison. That was when the imprisoned creatures began to realize that perhaps this was their only chance to regain their freedom. Groups of prisoners began to attack, using whatever weapons were available and the combat skills they had been forced to learn during their captivity. Creatures with the ability to control energy began to use their powers to weaken the security systems, while stronger beings charged into battle, destroying infrastructure and eliminating Zixitarian soldiers. Elias and his three dragons also joined the attack. The Warrior Dragon led the charge, fighting tirelessly to protect the defenseless prisoners. The Glass Dragon, with its ability to pass through and disappear into the darkness, helped dismantle the energy networks and access critical areas of the prison. The Mercury Dragon, with its power to manipulate matter, weakened the mechanical structures, clearing a path for Elias's team to reach the central area where the Zixitarian leaders were hiding. The battle grew increasingly intense. The Zixitarians, with their superior intelligence and strength, were not easy to defeat. They deployed sophisticated weapons to counterattack, trying to repel the uprising. Their assaults often caused confusion and fear among the prisoners. However, Elias never let them lose heart. He had learned to lead not just with strength, but with patience and intellect. Every time his group faced an obstacle, Elias encouraged them, reminding them that there was no other path but to fight until the end. As Elias's team neared the central area, where the Zixitarian leaders were concealed, a fierce battle erupted. The Warrior Dragon faced the experienced Zixitarian army, while Elias led the rest of the group towards the control center. The Zixitarian forces now had to confront creatures they had once considered inferior prisoners they had oppressed for so long. The frenzy of battle was not just about regaining freedom but about defeating the enemies that held dominion over the universe. As the battle raged on, Elias quickly realized that what he sought wasn't just victory in this battle. He didn't just want to defeat the Zixitarians, he wanted to send a larger message, a declaration of freedom and the right to life for all creatures in the universe. That was why he chose to confront the leader of the Zixitarians directly, not just to destroy, but to prove that humans and the oppressed beings were not subjects any civilization could control forever. The final confrontation took place in a vast room where Elias faced the leader of the Zixitarian prison. It was a massive creature, its body covered in a glossy outer shell, with cold, calculating eyes. While the prisoners continued to fight outside, Elias stepped forward, his gaze full of resolve. The Zixitarian leader sneered, seemingly viewing Elias's struggle as a mere game. But Elias remained undeterred. He challenged the leader with his intellect and courage. The confrontation was not about strength, but about wit, the ability to exploit every weakness the enemy never expected. And when the Zixitarian leader finally realized he had misjudged humanity, it was then that he lost control. The battle ended when the Zixitarian leader surrendered to Elias's intelligence and bravery. The Zixitarian prison had fallen, and the prisoners, the oppressed creatures, had regained their freedom. This uprising was not just a victory for Elias and his comrades, it was a triumph for freedom across all civilizations in the universe. Elias had not only saved himself, but he had also ignited a flame of hope for all beings threatened by the domination of the powerful. Elias stood on the edge of a new planet, his eyes gazing into the vastness of space, where the stars sparkled like precious jewels against the eternal night. This was a planet that he and his allies had just liberated from the brutal domination of the Zixitarians, but it was more than just that. It was a milestone in his long, arduous journey, a journey not only for victory but for the fight to rebuild hope, a hope for a future of peace in the universe. After the uprising, Elias's group had not only defeated the invaders but had opened up a new opportunity for all creatures in the universe. The battles were no longer just simple fights between the strong and the weak, between aliens and humans. They had transformed into struggles of intellect and resilience, where cross-galaxy cooperation despite the differences between beings had created a new foundation of freedom. Before leaving the Zixitarian prison, Elias had learned a very important lesson. Although the creatures he encountered throughout his journey were not always alike, they all shared one common trait, the desire for freedom and life. The strange dragons, the prisoners from far-off civilizations, and the creatures whose languages and thoughts he could barely comprehend, every one of them had an undeniable connection. It was the longing to live without being exploited or controlled by those stronger than them. Elias's group, which included the warrior dragon with its unparalleled strength, the glass dragon that could move in the darkness, and the Mercury Dragon with its ability to manipulate matter, had become symbols of unity and tireless fighting for freedom. Each dragon possessed a special power, each being in the group had their own tactics and strategies. But most importantly, they had learned how to combine their strengths to create a collective force stronger than anything they faced. From the brutal fights in the dark corridors of the prison to fierce battles on nameless planets, Elias had realized that cooperation was the key to victory. The bonds between humans and alien creatures were not always easy, but with understanding and unity, anything could change. This was not a war of winners and losers, it was a battle of civilizations that knew how to respect each other's right to life and self-determination. Now, standing on the edge of the new planet, Elias felt a rare sense of peace. This planet had not been ravaged by war, nor had it been claimed by invaders. However, he knew that nowhere in the vast universe was truly safe forever. While the victory over the Zixitarians was a significant step, Elias understood that threats from other civilizations or from those who wished to maintain control were always lurking. Therefore, his journey was far from over. Elias's group, now more than just a fighting force, had become a symbol of hope. Greater journeys awaited them. They would continue fighting not just for their own freedom but for the freedom of all creatures in the universe. Elias could not forget the comrades who had sacrificed their lives in the battles, but he also knew that the task of rebuilding the universe could not end with a single victory. Everything they had done was just the beginning. Beside Elias, his comrades the freed prisoners were no longer weak creatures, but warriors with unshakable resolve. Together with the three strange dragons, they had formed a powerful alliance, where the intellect and strength of humans and alien creatures combined, not only to protect this world but to extend their influence across other galaxies. Elias raised his hand, feeling the cold wind from the sky of the new planet sweep past him. This was a place without oppression, without chains, or invisible limits. Yet, he did not forget that it was the unity of all creatures that kept peace in the universe alive. Each planet, each civilization could contribute to a common future if they could overcome their differences, set aside racial divides, and learn to coexist. Bold plans had been drawn up. Not only to protect this new planet but to build a strong alliance between the civilizations of the universe. Elias had clearly seen that war was not the answer to everything, and that understanding between civilizations was the only way to prevent conflicts in the future. In his heart, a vision had formed a universe where cooperation and understanding, rather than division and domination, would be the foundation of all things. With unshakable resolve, Elias turned back to look at his team. Each of them played an important role in this journey. A dragon warrior, a glass dragon, a Mercury Dragon, and other creatures from distant civilizations, all of them were together writing the story of unity and hope. Elias knew that peace in the universe would not be easy to achieve, but he also understood that it was the efforts of people like him, of creatures willing to cooperate for a common goal, that would change the universe. And so, his journey and that of his comrades would continue. New challenges, new civilizations, and new battles awaited them. But this time, they would not face their enemies with weapons, but with cooperation, intellect, and courage.